Hello, welcome, and thank you for joining me for this session of Straight Chablis. My name is Maymata Aliyah. I'm a New York-based wine educator, and today the focus of my discussion is to bring more attention and differentiation between the two village-level appellations of Petit Chablis and Chablis, and to clarify how they fit into the overall structure of the Bourgogne wine region appellation system. In our discussion, we're going to highlight some of the key differences between these two terroirs. So we're not talking only about soil, we're also talking about location, we're talking about altitude, we're talking about exposure. And to help better illuminate the discussion, we're going to taste two wines from the same producer, from the same vintage, to really clarify some of those stylistic differences and how they express themselves in the glass. And to help better understand these differences, we are joined by A J Ojeda Pons. I will let AJ introduce himself in a minute, but before I do, I will say that in my opinion, these appellations do absolutely belong side by side on a wine list, as they do offer two very different stylistic differences. And if anyone knows anything about building a wine list, and especially a by the glass wine list, it would be AJ. So I'm going to turn it over to you, AJ. Please take a moment and introduce yourself to us and our guests.
Hi, May. Thank you for having me. Lovely to be here. So my name is A J Ojeda Pons. I am been working in the wine industry in New York City for a little bit over 20 years now. I am currently the director of operations here at the Temperance Wine Bar. So it's my wine bar where we carry over 100 wines by the glass. And previously, I worked as the beverage director at Mercado Little Spain with Chef José Andrés, and then before that, I was working as the wine director at the Lambs Club with Jeffrey Zakarian for about 8 years. But now I'm just kind of doing what I love. It's like my dream come true to finally have like my own wine bar where I can actually showcase a lot of these wines.
That's quite the wine background. All right, so let's dive in and let's talk a little bit about these two appellations. So I just wanted to take a bit of a step back to talk about the appellation structure in Bourgogne, right? So we have our three different appellation levels. We have our regional, we have our village, and within that we have our village premier cru, and then we have our grand cru. So today, when I'm talking about Chablis and Petit Chablis, the first thing I would love to clarify is that Petit Chablis does not sit below Chablis on the hierarchy pyramid. They actually are both village appellations. All right, so Petit Chablis and Chablis are both village appellations. What really differentiates those two appellations is the terroir, as I mentioned. And with that, when we talk about Chablis, and I think every wine student, one of the first fancy words you learn in wine class is Kimmeridgian soils. And I remember when I learned that, I was like, ooh, Kimmeridgian soils. Well, Kimmeridgian are the soils that really define Chablis, right? What are they? They're kind of a complex set of soils. They have alternating layers of limestone, clay, marl, calcareous marl, but most importantly, they contain a lot of small oyster shells. And that's what a lot of people say really defines and characterizes, oh, now I'm flubbing my word, characterizes the minerality of Chablis wines. The Chablis wine region is rather large, so you have a variety of orientations there. But generally, the Chablis wines are at sort of what we would call mid-level elevation. When it comes to Petit Chablis, we are on what we call slightly younger soils, but let me just quantify that for Chablis Kimmeridgian soils, we're talking about soils that are about 150 years old. And for the Portlandian soils of the Petit Chablis, we're talking about younger soils. They're about 130 million years old. So, you know, they're still pretty old, but they're a younger soil. They sit on top. So usually when you look at the appellation of Chablis and then you see the plateaus, on the plateaus is where you have those younger soils, the Portlandian soils, and these soils do not have those fossil, that presence of fossils. It's the more limestone soil. And also because you're on these plateaus, it's generally more windswept. Oftentimes you also might have a more northern orientation. So what that all means is that the styles of the wines are really quite different. They tend to be a little bit more open, a little bit more accessible, a little bit more on the citrus notes, and it may be a little bit less on that sort of brooding minerality that you will get on the Chablis appellation. So this is kind of really giving it a broad stroke. But I find it really interesting that oftentimes people do think of Petit Chablis as lesser than, even though, as I just mentioned, they sit on the same quality level. So, AJ, I'm going to ask you this question, and this is just kind of your opinion on this because I know I have mine, but why do you think that is? Why do you think that so many people seem to think of Petit Chablis as kind of a lesser appellation than Chablis?
Well, I would have to say that, I think there's a little bit of confusion about that, and it has been for quite some time. And maybe it goes back to the fact that Burgundy has always followed this model of hierarchy, where you kind of have like the Village appellation, the Premier Cru, and the Grand Cru appellation. So Petit Chablis kind of always gets shadowed by the great Grand Crus of Chablis. I feel like they don't get enough love because the winemaking and Burgundy is exactly the same, especially in Chablis. The winemaking is exactly the same. They just have a different style, and maybe there's another factor, which is availability. You don't see them as much in market. So, but I think it's just a matter of confusion. Maybe the word petite, people think that it's like something that's lesser, less concentration, less quality. When you think of like Chablis or Chablis Premier Cru, Chablis Grand Cru, that just means like greater. But actually, I think the wines actually offer an incredible amount of quality, just at a different level, a different style.
Do you find that sometimes if you are looking for a Petit Chablis, do you have difficulty finding Petit Chablis from your suppliers?
I think so, and I think perhaps it's because of the fact that many importers might not want to bring them and may want to just kind of like bring more wines that are more, I guess, appealing to the consumer or something that are better known. Maybe it's the fear that they won't be able to sell them. Yeah, so you don't see them as much. If you really dial it back to the fact that you're talking about a sense of place, right, an origin, and in the origin, you kind of just go back to the soil type. If you really kind of pinpoint that, between Cameridian and Portlandian soil, then you really should just be thinking about the origin of the place and not the quality level.
In terms of production as well, Chablis is 66% of what the region is producing, whereas Petit Chablis is about 18%. So there just is a lot more Chablis than there is Petit Chablis, and I think that also correlates to the availability of these wines. So, and if they're much more rare in a way, and you'd think that should give them a little bit more appeal, because we like things that are rare in this in New York. So shall we taste some wine?
Absolutely, yeah, we should. It's funny because like we think of these things as being so homogeneous. Like you think of like Chablis is homogeneous with the soil, the Petit Chablis is homogeneous, but like it's hardly ever like that. There's so many layers. Like there's so many places that are the layers of soils like combine with each other, and so it's hard to really like separate it into like one thing that is just so unique.
Yeah, I always say, as a wine educator, our job is to sort of give these easy handles for people to remember. But even when we talk about the Cameridian soils of Chablis, I mean, it's not one uniform soil. You have some areas that have more clay, some that are more marl, some that have more, more of the fossil presence, some that's more exposed. So, so there's also a lot of diversity in that. So, let me just show you the wines that we're tasting. So, we're tasting the Christophe et Fille. They're really lovely wines. We're starting with the Petit Chablis, and we are tasting both wines from the 2018 vintage. So the focus of this discussion is not really on vintage variation, but just to sort of contextualize, 2018 was a very, I would say it was sort of the big relief vintage for the wine region, because 2016 was a vintage that had a lot of loss in volume. 17 had its own challenges. And when it came to 18, it was really a vintage that really delivered both in terms of quality and quantity. So it was kind of a big relief for a lot of the winemakers there that they finally had a year where they had both quality and quantity. They could take a bit of a breath. So let's start by the Petit Chablis. And so I'll just share my thoughts on the Petit Chablis. I was sort of found a lot of really pleasant citrus notes on it. It's open. I found that on the nose, it's quite open and there's a freshness to it. There's a vibrancy to it that I found very appealing.
Yeah, indeed. Also, a lot of those sort of like fresh, crisp white fruits, as well as the citrus. The thing about Petit Chablis and Chablis, being both of them, they're like village appellations, right? So with Petit Chablis, you generally get more fruit, and I think that has to do with the Portlandian soils, right? They generally produce fruitier wine, so you won't have as much of that sort of like salty minerality that you get with Premier Cruz and Grand Cruz, but they still do get a stony minerality here, right? You get this citrus and white fruits and touch of floral, but this sort of like licking rock minerality in as a backbone.
So much minerality, right? It's like of lime for me on the back of my palate. It's really crisp. It's really fresh. It's really juicy. It doesn't have that salt, just to your point. It doesn't have this sort of like saltiness that I tend to get a lot on Chablis. But it's incredibly juicy and mouth-watering. And lovely. I mean, I think so. I want to
the acid structure. You forget about this, like like the acid is just so great with these wines too.
Acid is fantastic, and that's what's really just my mouth is just like this gushing of saliva going on there. All right, so you know what? Maybe before we move on, food. I know you've got. I mean, you've got such a tremendous background in food. I love that you also worked at Mercado. You were at the Lampa, which was like maybe more meat centric, and then you were at Mercado was all this beautiful tapas, and now you're here, at Temperance. So, what would you pair this Petit Chablis with, just kind of off the top of your head?
Well, there are so many like choices that I think that can pair with this wine and with Petit Chablis in general. And I think the range is quite wide because you could be having something like fried calamari, or you can be having a crudo with a hatch chili sauce, or something more vegetal like a crudité platter with green goddess dressing, or a simple fish, just fancier with some gremolata or some salsa verde, and even just a chicken with like some lemon zest and herbs. So I think there's a wide range of dishes that you can actually pair with a wine like this.
All right, let's taste the Chablis now, because I've been talking about the Petit Chablis, and I love it. And I think again, my case is always like I think it's a great by the glass wine. And I think you kind of gave us a lot of ideas why that may hold true. But let's taste it against the Chablis. So this again is the same producer, Sir Christophe Effy, same vintage. But this is from Chablis, and it's a vieille vigne. So just to also give a little bit of context, the first wine, the vineyards were, I think the vines were about 15 years old. Now we're talking about old vines, so vieille vigne meaning old vine. And here the vines are about 60 years old plus. So you expect a little bit more intensity from wines that are coming from older vineyards, and that's also why they oftentimes will go through the trouble of letting you know that on the front label. So to me, on the nose, there's already a big distinction between the two. I mean, whereas I sort of feel like the Petit Chablis comes at me, this one is forcing me in. It's really making me have to work a little bit harder to extract some of the aromas. I'm not getting the same kind of citrus, exuberant citrus that's popping out at me with those kind of like stone fruit and white flowers. What do you think of the nose difference here, AJ?
I feel like the fruit here is a little riper. Maybe there's a touch more of yellow fruit here, like white peach or ripe peach, but very fresh. And also the character of like white fruit. When I think of like green apple, I think this is more kind of like golden, delicious apple, perhaps.
Yeah. I also tend to think a lot in terms of apples when it comes to Chablis. And I was like, the first one was sort of a very crunchy Granny Smith for me, and this is definitely more on the golden delicious. There is more ripeness on this wine. There's more concentration and intensity on this wine. There's a more sort of a saline finish for me. But it's quite a big wine in the sense of its concentration. It's not a big voluminous wine, but there's a lot of concentration going on in this wine, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is actually what like actually can show you how the transition between Portlandian and Kimi region soil can be seen, right? Because like this is it's different exposure, different altitude, different yeah. So like you can actually see how the Chardonnay can change in character from being in this sort of like plateau going to this sort of like more southern exposure areas
Yeah. Hmm.
that are more Kimi region laced.
One we talk a lot about Chardonnay being a grape variety that is a mirror of its terroir, and oftentimes that mirror is obliterated by a lot of winemaking, I find. But what I've always loved about Chablis is it's an area where you really get to hone in on Chardonnay in its purity without the heavy hand of winemaking. It doesn't mean there's not winemaking. There's always winemaking, right? I mean, whenever you're making wine, there's some level of winemaking and decisions that go into it. But this isn't an area where you've got all the oak and all this other stuff that's kind of covering. So you're really getting the purity of this expression of the grape in these two very different terroirs. So the Petit Chablis sort of it's more open. It's a little bit more forward, beautiful acidity. And to me, structurally, that acidity is really what's kind of defining that wine. When it comes to Chablis, it is richer. You're getting, you're slightly lower elevation. You do feel more intensity. You do feel more ripeness. As you said, I love your analogy, sort of going from a greener apple to more golden, delicious, more golden fruit. It's a big wine. I mean, this is a wine that I also would would keep for a few years. I mean, we oftentimes kind of talk about these wines as drink young, drink now. But I do, to my mind, especially the Chablis, it could wait a few years. Do you have any thoughts on that actually?
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, obviously, with this amount of acid, the acid can definitely carry this wine through for a couple more years, for a few years actually. And I think also that helps it. I think of like when I think of like comparing these wines to, let's say, the ones from the Côte d'Or, which kind of have that excess puppy fat, right? That with all that richness, right? With this wines a little bit leaner, so like I feel like they can actually go further on a straight line.
Yeah. Yeah, there's that linearity of the acidity in Chablis that is always kind of beautiful. There's a tension to the wines. I always kind of come back to the same word tension when I'm talking about Chablis, because there's even in riper years, that acidity is always there and it always anchors the wines. Okay, food thoughts on this wine. I was going to ask you that question. So we talked about a lot of potential for the Petit Chablis. So what would you do with this wine?
So with this wine, I probably would go for a little bit of like heftier dishes, right? And you can still actually pair it with oysters and crudos and raw dishes for sure. Definitely, there's that character over there. They will not overpower. The wines would actually like complement each other. But I think I want to see more fried food, like more strong flavors, like more savory herbs. And I also even veal and duck. It's crazy how you may think that it's only available for red wines, but it's actually like with a Chablis like that, you're just having like a pan-seared duck with butter and thyme, like would pair so nicely with it too. It would just cut through the fat, and it would pair very very well. Same thing with like schnitzel. I mean, have you ever had schnitzel and Chablis? That's such a great pairing, right? You get that breaded, fried cutlet with the lemon, and it's just such an incredible pairing with Chablis.
I love that idea, the schnitzel. See, what I really like is, I feel like, yes, oysters. I mean, we love oysters, but I don't know about you. I'm not sitting at home like shucking oysters every night, you know. But I am more likely to have fish, or I am more likely to have, some chicken. I am more likely to have some schnitzel actually, or pan veal. So those are dishes that I'm more likely to have at home. And yeah, I think those, and I wish I was having oysters every night, but that's not my reality. Well, this was great. Thank you so much. So any final parting thoughts for us? You want to just can you just remind us of the name of your fab? So are you in your bar right now? Is that what I'm seeing behind you?
Yeah, yes, I am right behind me. So with this, I feel like I'm in a box of the 1980s, 1970s, the old New York.
Love it.
So my wine bar is called Temperance. Temperance is on 40 Carmine Street here in the West Village. And yeah, final thoughts. I said, like don't. I love to shine a light on wines that don't get the love in general. So, and this is a place where I like to do it. So like my list is less about the mainstream, less about the all the great varieties that but also just these wine regions that offer an incredible amount of quality, an incredible amount of like taste and flavor and versatility. So, and everything's by the glass. So, I just come down sometime and play around. We have many small plates, and that was kind of like the idea, so that like one wine can pair with like 15, 20 dishes. The same thing, you get this Petit Chablis here, and there's like 6, 7, 8 dishes that you can pair with. And you get the Chablis, and you can do the same thing.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. I will be down to Temperance as soon as I can easily get down there. I'm going to look for that Petit Chablis on your list. And I really appreciated your time and your thoughts and your availability. And thank you so much, AJ.
Thank you. Really, thank you for having me.
All right.